When you're doing home learning, you're at your own pace, but also what you learn is all the answers are in the book. So all you have to do is read the book, you'll learn it. It's that easy. You don't need a teacher. You don't need somebody at the blackboard lecturing to you so that you can imbibe everything that they're saying and then regurgitate it later. That's not learning, that's memorization. This is why I say it's not black and white, it's 3D Technicolor. My kids have so far surpassed anything that I could have thought up.
Sam, talk to me about this concept of home learning and how it differs from both the traditional education system and also people's idea of what homeschooling is supposed to be.
Oh my gosh. So that's the best question to start with because it is entirely different. I say it's like the difference between shooting in grainy black and white and moving into 3D high def Technicolor. It's actually entirely different. So what's happened is through the decades, our school system has destroyed the proper notion of what education is. So the schools are no longer engaged in education, but I'll walk you through a little bit of it. So when you and I went to school, when some older people than us went to school, the focus was academics. And for decades, it was academics. It was like, you got to get your math, you got to get your writing, you got to get your reading, and you got to know a bunch of stuff, and then you're educated. And so during that time, say the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they then started this movement to say, hey, you know what? The Bible doesn't really belong in the schools. Morality shouldn't be an issue that's taught. Education should just be academics. So get the Bible out. And when they took the Bible out of schools, then they could start degrading the materials that they were teaching because there was no morality that was attached to anything. So good or bad went out the window. And so then we started to see this shift from the academics. And so now they don't even pretend to teach academics, even though your and my definition, the working definition in the culture of education is academics. Now they're saying, no, it's not. It's actually moral. It's all morality. And the morality is transgenderism, CRT, DEI, Black Lives Matters. So it's completely morphed. And so now, a lot of Americans are waking up and going, well, okay, my idea of education is definitely not that. And what they need to do is take the next step and say, okay, so wait a minute. If the educators are telling me that that's education and I'm in disagreement with that, I'm in disagreement with the transgender, I'm in disagreement with DEI, I'm in disagreement with not teaching children math, I'm in disagreement with the state of Oregon saying you don't have to do math or read to graduate high school, I'm in disagreement with that, then you take a step back, you go, okay, so if that's not education, what is education? Because what we're doing is we're falling back on our old definition of education, which arguably got us where we are today. And the old definition of education was it's purely academic, and it's not. And so then you say, okay, so then what is home learning? I call it home learning because I want to distinguish it, right, from the homeschool and from the school. Home learning is the elevation of the child, the raising up of the child in the way the child should go. It's rearing a child. It's educating a child to be a full adult, to understand civics, to understand forgiveness, to know how to ask for forgiveness, to know how to be forgiving. And also, there's some academics in that too, because you ought to know some stuff, right? You ought to know some history. You ought to know where this country came from. You ought to know that this country was founded by 56 Christian men based entirely on the Bible and the studies of the Bible, right? And based entirely on writings of people who based all of their writing on the Bible, right? So you ought to know this stuff. And partly the reason that you ought to know that stuff is because we're raising people to be engaged as human beings in their communities, and our community is America.
Yeah, I think it was John Adams who famously said the Constitution is written for a moral and religious people. And when people push back, that's not a Christian nation. It's like, well, what you just said is 100% the truth. Like this, the grounding foundational principles of our nation. And I agree. I do think people are waking up to the education system not solving the problem. You see just the chaos that we've witnessed over the last 4 or 5 years. So with more and more people moving to homeschooling, home learning, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see parents making when they get their kids out of school and begin to try to teach them or educate them at home?
Yeah, well, the biggest mistake is this focus on academics. And so the parents stand over the child and say, do your math. And you shouldn't do that. Because what school did to us, I don't know, I can't speak for you, but I'm gonna. We hated school,
Yeah.
hated it. And because of the transfer, we hated learning. But learning's the most fun thing in the whole world. You learned, so you did weightlifting, bodybuilding, that kind of stuff?
Yeah,
How'd
I
you learn how
started
to do that?
from other people,
You didn't go to
from
school
mentors,
for it?
from other bodybuilders.
You
No, I
didn't
mean, I
attend classes? You didn't pass exams for weightlifting and bodybuilding?
nope.
No, you learned because you wanted to. And it was fascinating to you, I bet. I bet you read voraciously about the weightlifting and the bodybuilding and how to improve your nutrition and all the stuff, right? Because you were fascinated by it, because you wanted to dive into that. And you didn't have the school telling you, it's 10 o'clock now, it's time to do math. Or worse, now it's noon, we're going to have lunch and you're going to study up on what you're eating to make sure that you're doing the proper things for your body, right? Which would then deter you from learning about nutrition, because nobody likes to be coerced into doing things, which is what the schools do. So the number one mistake that I would say parents so easily make, and by the way, there's no judgment here. I get it. I did it too. I was not the perfect homeschool parent. Okay. I was very standard, frankly. When you focus too much on the academics, it destroys the will of the child to learn. What you ought to focus on is, what does the child want to learn? And then throw in some of the stuff that you want the child to learn as kind of a grand bargain. You're gonna get to do this, but first you got to do this. And so I used to make deals with my kids, right? If you can finish all of your academic homework by noon, you get a half hour of games, because my oldest was highly motivated to play games. And boy, he was up at 6 a.m. finishing his work before 11 to make sure that he locked in that game time or whatever, right? And so what happens is, when you move into this home learning paradigm, it becomes a little bit of a partnership, not on an equal footing. You're the parent, they're the child. So it's never like this, it's not parity, but you get to guide that child into adulthood, and you're going to make mistakes and they're going to make mistakes and you're going to work it out. But it becomes this great journey, this adventure, to allow the child a little bit of leeway and see where that gets them, and then watch them soar, because they will so far exceed your expectations or even your hopes, um, because they are individuals. And when they're not hampered by the school locking them in a room all day and telling them exactly what to think and all of that other stuff, and the bullying and the social pressures and all that, then they become their own people, and you fall in love with your children all over again. You get to watch them mature into young adults, and it beats all. There's nothing like it. And what we've allowed the schools to do is rob our society of this great journey, this great experiment, this great developing that we could have had. But the schools have moved in, usurped the role of the parent in the house, caused a rift between the child and the parent, and it's a very sad thing. And when I was like maybe 5 years in, I started to realize that, and I got very angry that the school was so happy to destroy the relationship that I had with my children. And when my children all became teenagers, and I tell people this, as teenagers, they would individually come to my room. My husband traveled a lot, and they'd come to my room at night, and I would, if Kevin was out of town, they were off doing their thing, I would just go to bed and sit on my computer. I did a radio show every morning, and so I would prep the radio show the night before on my computer. And on any given occasion, one of my teenagers would come into my room, sit on the end of my bed, and pour out their day to me, and we would have this discussion. And it wasn't that they were necessarily looking for help, they just wanted to chat. How many parents do you know today whose kids go to school have children who just want to chat with their parents? And so that's the example that I give to people, because people would say, "Oh my gosh, you have 3 teenagers? Oh, you've got your hands full." And I'd be like, "Full of love? What are you getting at?" I didn't have teenagers who rebelled. That is a lie that's been perpetrated by the schools and by the culture, because it's so common for teenagers who have been enrolled in school and separated from their parents so divisively to rebel. But it's not normal behavior. We've only normalized it in our culture because we have normalized this mistreatment of children that we call schooling.
Yeah, I definitely want to get both into your journey into this, and then maybe touch on some of the agenda behind why this is happening at such an accelerated rate. It seems like today, but I appreciate you kind of speaking for me. That was spot on, right? Not only did I hate school, but I never saw it as a place that was teaching me anything. Like, I was pretty in tune to that very early on. I'm like, there's a system to how you're going to pass this thing. Once I hacked the system and I knew what I needed to do to get the grades that were going to be acceptable at home, right? I graduated a 3.9, 23rd in a class of over 550. Not boasting any of that because it wasn't a great accomplishment. It was very easy for me to do that, but it wasn't preparing me for anything in life. I didn't see the teachers as superior, competent. Exactly. It's like, what are they going to teach me? It's like none of them even had their lives together. And I knew that as a teenager.
Yeah. So that's the thing is now imagine, maybe not you, but another teenager who goes to school and has that inkling, has that understanding, these people are ridiculous. Why would I want to learn anything from them? But that teenager's parents is saying, no, you listen to them because they know better than I do. And the teenager knows that there's something wrong with that, but they're resentful of their parents from putting them into that situation under the supervision of this idiot. And look, okay, let's not go after teachers. There are plenty of great teachers out there, right? We're not really talking about the teachers. We're talking about the system. And so what I say to parents is, you run an insurance company. Don't you think you have something to offer your children in terms of like living a good life and finding good employment and running a business, say? Like, don't you think you have more to offer than the 22-year-old who just graduated teachers college?
Yeah, and I'm sure you hear this one a lot, right? When you're speaking with parents and at conferences, is, oh, I would never be qualified to educate my students. It's like, okay, so you grew up in that system, right? And it produced you to be unqualified. So let's put our children back into that system. What is it unqualifying them to do?
That's right. The other thing that I want to mention before, I don't know where we're moving to, but before we move on, um, the focus of the schools when they turn to academics, the focus shifted to raising young people to get jobs, and not just any jobs, better jobs, right? And so it became all about college prep, because college graduates earn more money than non-college graduates on average. It's not actually a steadfast rule, but on average, and because we apparently are a culture of averages and all of our children are average, we just applied that to ourselves, right? And so now it's college prep and career readiness, which really boils down to money. And so what we train our children in schools is, one, there's no morality, survival of the fittest and evolution, right? And two, your highest value, the highest aspiration that you have is to earn as much money as possible. All that's doing is creating competent and more competent criminals. And that's where we are today. Look at Washington, D.C.
You and I were both at an event a few months back here in Tampa, Save Our Children, and one of the speakers there, I think he ran the pre-breakfast panel that you and Kevin were both a part of, was Lucas Miles, author of Woke Jesus. We had Lucas on the show weeks after that, talking about how the left has, really infiltrated the church, right? There's been a clear and decisive agenda to get liberalism, wokeism, leftism, whatever kind of language you want to use it, into the church to from the top down indoctrinate these principles. How much of that is happening? Because we're talking about, the agenda, pulling God out here, the destruction of morality. Now we're teaching LGBTQ and all these other kind of genderism types of things. How much of this has been a clear and decisive plan? And then who is kind of at the root of that?
I have the book right here.
Naked Communist.
Highly, highly recommend this book. And I even have the page marked, I believe. See if I can find it. Yeah, here it is.
Is that the
So, okay,
45, the
so
45 steps?
the 45 goals of the Communist Party entered into the congressional record. Number 17, get control of the schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, put the party line in textbooks. Eliminate prayer, number 28, or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. I mean, they had it completely sussed out. Here's number 26. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy.
Well, those are the two that I talk about a lot, right? I shared with you at the beginning the work that I do with helping men overcome pornography addiction. And when I started down this path, I'm like, yeah, I'm helping men get free. I'm helping them fight this addiction that had me slave for 20 plus years. And then I watched the movie Agenda, and then I witnessed 2020. And then I began to get exposed to some of these things. And I said, wait a minute. Pornography, the age of introduction is 8 to 11 years old. It's clearly on our hands right now. It could easily be, I could type a word into social media and they would flag my account immediately. But these things are accessible to children and it's being promoted to them. So I read through the book, right? And I think you touched on one there. And then it also talked about making pornography accessible. I think that's another point in the book as well. So naked communist. So this has been something that has been in the works for 70 years.
Yeah, we were set up and they used our schools to do it. And of course, it talks about the church, infiltrate the church and all that. It's absolutely set up. Now, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, it's kind of comforting to know that that you were targeted and set up, and so it's not entirely your fault. But you got to take responsibility if you want to fix it, and so we ought to just take responsibility to fix it. So while I say it's not really our fault, hey, come on, where were the churches when they were taking the Bible out of schools? There should have been more outrage, much more uproar. But the churches and the churchgoers were like, well, because we were softened, and we were softened in the schools. How? We were taught not to discern. We were taught anti-discrimination. Do you know this nation was much less racist during Martin Luther King than it is today? Much less. And yet here we are today with this rampant racism claims everywhere, right? And I don't dispute that there is racism and there are racists. I dispute the idea that it is systemic and systematic, and that it's just rampant, and that there's no way to win, because the CRT DEI folks are basically saying you got to tear down the whole system because it was built on racism and therefore it cannot stand. Well, if you tear down the system, what are you going to get? A lot of racism and no system at all, no upward mobility for anybody. And of course, that is their goal because they're commies.
How do we, I feel like I don't know if we're course correcting. We talked about people waking up. You see a lot more parents bringing their children home. You see conversations like this being had. You hear, Vivek talking about, like, if he were to get in office, completely abolishing the Department of Education. Like, if you were to, have a crystal ball, or you were to have it Sam's way, like we're talking 5, 10, maybe 20 years into the future, like, is everybody home learning, or is there the home learning side of things, but we have schools that are now not these indoctrination centers? Like, let's kind of play in that world a little bit here and kind of talk about like what the future can look like from an optimistic kind of standpoint.
Well, I think when we started, we didn't have federal taxes as a nation. We didn't have public schools, really. We didn't have the infrastructure that our tax dollars has provided. So getting out of that is going to be, extricating us from this tentacled beast that has now pervaded our society and our culture is going to be very difficult. But on a case by case, person by person basis, we can do it. We can certainly get it underway, and then the results will speak for themselves. So the results of the homeschooled children, they beat schooled children by 30% or more on average. So if you're just looking, and that's academics only, we're not talking about whole human, right? We're just talking academics. You talk about whole human, homeschoolers by and large are much better socialized than school children because they associate with more people of different walks of life and different ages than school children who are locked in a school. That's why the argument, well, what about socialization, is absurd, because how is a child to be socialized when they are told to sit at a desk and not speak to people? And learning social skills from people of your own age group is absurd. Your children should not be learning anything from people of his own age group, basically.
This message will get preached from the top of the mountain, kind of like in the circles that I run in, right? Kind of in this personal health, self-development world. Like, you're the byproduct of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And parents will say that about their own life. And then they send to the school to the kids that they don't know the values and principles of the children's homes that they're being raised in. They don't know the values and principles of the teachers. It's like, okay, we're going to pay attention to our friends, but yeah, we'll just throw our kids to the wolves' nest, right? It's like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right. So hopefully there's a awakening that's coming. There's certainly an awakening in the culture today of the lawfare that's taking place, and the political atmosphere, and the negativity that is pervading. And there are a lot of people who are saying, that's just wrong, and I don't want my child a part of that. And of course, we're seeing it in the schools also, right? And so they're just withdrawing their kids. Now, the problem that I see is they might just go online and go K through 12, which is basically public school on a laptop, which is the worst thing you possibly, not as bad as sending your child to school, but really not much better. So whatever you do, don't do that. And there are plenty of other options for homeschooling that offer actually not bad content, uplifting, and you can at least get yourself started that way. And so I think that a lot of families are making that choice. And what's going to happen is, when you give children the truth, they they embrace it, and then they search for more. When you give them lies, they hate it because they know that it's a lie. They feel betrayed, and that's how you get the rebellious teenager from the school system, because kids know that they're being lied to in school, and it's not a good thing. And they know that if they're being lied to in school, it's their parents who aren't protecting them from that. And that's why just as a parent, if you just don't send your child to school, you're already ahead of the game. Don't send your child to school and then don't provide electronics. You're almost there. Like, that's literally almost all you have to do. Then add in some classic literature and encourage the child to read, and you're home free, because from there the child can learn everything that he or she wants and needs. You just have to protect the child from the wild wild west, which is unbridled internet, which of course we've talked about. Kids are being targeted, so you have to put the brakes on that. But if you give them some truth, if you give them some opportunity to learn, kids are self-motivated to learn. When they're 2, they're constantly asking questions. That's them trying to learn. What are they told? Shut up. Stop asking me. Don't ever do that to a child. Answer every question to the best of your ability. And if you're tired, make an excuse and tell them you'll answer it tomorrow or later, but don't ever shut a child down from asking questions.
Yeah. Man, I think one of the realest, truest statements I heard was, when you give your kid the internet, you're not giving them the internet, you're giving them to the internet. And, it's like, you open up that Pandora's box, and, I've spoken at a lot of different events now, you just see the rise in predators and pedophilia. And there's apps out there that don't even look like apps, and they have these vanish modes, and they look like a vault. And it's like, now they can get through the video games. Let's get a little bit maybe more tactical on, like, if the person's like, okay, I want to kind of take, and then we'll get into kind of your story, a little bit towards the end here. But, if somebody wants to kind of take the leap and begin down this journey, pulling them out of school first, great, boom, okay, get them off the internet, answer the questions to the best of your ability, reading the classic literature. In terms of like curriculum though, like is there a need for a curriculum? How are they learning math? How are they learning history? Like, that's not going to come from the literature books, is it?
Is it not? Depends on what books they read. There's some excellent biographies out there that are history and biographical. A great story. For instance, I just finished Benjamin Franklin's biography. It's like this thick. It's an enormous book. It's such a good book. Such a great story. That man was like Elvis and Michael Jackson all rolled into one. He was world renowned back when the world was farther away from everything. There was no internet. You had to take a boat across the ocean to get to the mainland, to get to the continent, right? And he was so well known because He changed the world. He was an inventor. He was a printer. He was a publisher. He was a writer. He was a statesman, a diplomat. He's the only man who signed all 4 of our establishing documents for the United States of America. Like that's history, and it's a really good book. It's a great story. So yeah, you can actually give your children that way. I like to say that parents are the curriculum. And the reason that I say that is because I want people to take a step back and stop thinking about education like school. School is not education. Well, then what, Sam? Well, then you have to teach your children how to be the right kind of person to make it in the world. And are you the right kind of person who made it in the world? Let's assume that you are, then you're the curriculum. They need to learn from you. You need to take them to the bank. You need to teach them how to deposit the check or how to withdraw the money or how to talk to the teller or how to talk to the DMV when they're getting their license even, right? You're going to train your children up in the way you want them to go, and then they will be the individuals that you hope that they can be, right? Now, you can't do that because you've been so brainwashed that school is education. I get it because I was there. It took me 10 years to get to this point, right? So there are curricula out there. I actually have I have my book, which is, well, anyway, I did the playbook for home learning, which is sort of all of this philosophy for the parents to digest. It's actually a 15 video series that and you can get everything at samsorbo.com. I have all my materials there. So to retrain you on how to think about the education of your child, so you pick the curriculum that's going to work the best for you. But there are some great ones out there. I love 5 in a row. I didn't use 5 in a row because it came after I had realized my mistake. I did Classical Conversations, which is a homeschool group. It's a co-op. It's international now, and they do a classical Christian education, which is excellent. But I focused way much harder on academics than I should have. So that's my caveat. But Classical Conversations is excellent. And they also, by the way, none of these people pay me. I did Shirley Grammar. Shirley has a fantastic grammar and writing program, which is just terrific. I can't speak highly enough about it. There's also Institute for Excellence in Writing. That is an amazing program, teaches you how to write properly. And that is a skill set that will help you later in life be persuasive, and you will need to be persuasive later in life. So you do want that skill set. So you want to give your children skills, and you want to give your children information and knowledge based on true history, which they can get from good books, which they can get from good, let's say not novels necessarily, although there's some great historical fiction novels out there, or historical fiction. So maybe the novel's fiction, but it deals with history. It deals with actual historical events. But there's some great books out there that are like stories of actual people. Nathaniel Bowditch, Carry On, Mr. Bowditch is a young adult work of it's young adult. I don't think it counts as fiction because he actually lived, but it's his story told as a story. It's a phenomenal story about a young man who pulled himself up by his own bootstraps. He taught himself Latin because he had a Latin Bible and an English Bible. He taught himself Latin. And then he went on because he was super mathematical, and he rewrote the maritime journals that helped ships navigate, and he saved countless lives because of his innovations in maritime calculations. And I mean, this was a young man who he beat all odds. He was extremely poor. He was not educated. Okay. So my point is, you give your children those stories and they have somebody to aspire to. And they'll be like, I want to be like Nate Bowditch. I want to be like that guy. I want to be like Benjamin Franklin. And you say, you know what? You live in America. The sky's the limit. You can do anything in this great nation. And and then you know what? They fall in love with the nation. And they say, well, we need to preserve the liberties that are existent in this nation because other people are going to come behind me and they're going to be me. And we're not doing that with our kids today in school. In school, we're teaching our children to hate this nation, and it's an abomination.
Yeah, I think the emphasis on skill development is key and crucial, especially with the rise of AI, robots in the very near future. A lot of jobs are just going to be automated and gone. And if you don't have skills that you can bring to the marketplace, like you're going to be left by the wayside. And you and Kevin have 3 kids, correct? All adults now?
22, 20, and just 18.
Okay. And are they in the workforce, or are they still kind of figuring out what they're going to do?
Do you mean, are they in the workforce or are they in college?
I mean, are they entrepreneurs? They're all entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So my 2 oldest are actors, but Braden also runs a social media company. So he provides social media services for various individuals and companies. And my younger son Shane is an actor and a model, and so he's out traveling the world doing that. And then Octavia just graduated high school, so she's thinking about tutoring for the next year, just to sort of figure out where she wants to end up.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. They all got those good Sorbo genes, it sounds like. But in terms of some careers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, these need secondary training, right? Like you would agree that there's going to need to be some structured curriculum and things taught. So can they homeschool through K through 12? And then what does that look like transitioning into a university? Because what I hear is like the universities are even more of an indoctrination center.
So we right thinking people face a big struggle right now. Our institutions have been completely compromised. The American Association of Pediatricians has just passed notes on email to try to circumvent states that are not allowing gender transformation surgeries in minors. And so the Pediatric Association, the premier pediatric association, is trying to figure out how to break laws. Okay. The medical community, just in general, is severely compromised post COVID. The legal community, I'm not sure, right? So but let's put that aside. Let's just say we're living in normal times and your child wants to pursue a degree in medicine. If we were living in these times, I would say, well, maybe the degree in medicine that they want is not necessarily the American Medical Association degree. Maybe because those are different hoops, and I don't know that you want to jump through those hoops, right? Those hoops are pro-abortion, pro-gender transform surgery for minors, pro some things, pro-vaccine, right? So you might want to take a step back, but let's say you don't. Let's say everything's even and you want to pursue that. If you don't go to college, but you study up for the MCATs and you pass the MCATs, you can likely get into any medical school that you choose, because no medical school is going to turn away a kid who does well on the MCATs but didn't go to college. They'll be like, that's special, right? So the idea that you have to graduate high school to attend college, I did not graduate high school. I attended Duke University for biomedical engineering. Also didn't graduate there, but who's counting? My point is, we have these ideas that there are rules, and there aren't. There are laws. You should never break the law. But like the good people, they're always looking for what's the rule so that I can follow the rule. And I'm trying to encourage people, the rules that those guys set up for you, the DEI guys and the gender affirming care guys, those might not be the rules that you want to follow. So you got to give some thought. And, we're still stuck in, well, I want my child to get a good job. You're going to have to distance yourself from, I want my child to make a lot of money. That's a cultural lie that is meant to entrap you and make you distrust yourself and trust the system. And it's wrong. Bill Gates, for instance, Oprah Winfrey, for instance, Mark Cuban, I think, the Virgin Air guy. Like, none of those people graduated anything. Well, okay, graduated high school, maybe. So my point is, there are a lot of exceptions to the rule, and they're like phenomenal. Except they're not just, well, okay, so he's a plumber and he does okay for himself. No, they're like phenomenal exceptions because they knew rules don't apply. Now, I'm not saying that every child is exceptional. Well, actually, I am. I think that every child is exceptional, and I think that when we put them in a system that tries to make them conform, we we destroy the child. We destroy their exceptionalism. We put limitations on them. And so then there are a few that that are good in that system, and they shoot to the top, and good on them. The system works for them. But for all the kids that the system doesn't work for, they've been impaired by that same system. And so maybe just first do no harm. That used to be the Hippocratic Oath. Maybe first do no harm to your child, and allow yourself to explore what life could be for that child before you put them into a system that wants to, stamp them inside a mold, and make them behave like something that you might not want when you get it back, which a lot of parents are discovering. I mean, I interviewed a woman whose daughter declared that she was transgender when she was 12 years old because of one meeting at the art club after school. And they went on a 9-month torture ride with this little girl almost committing suicide before they finally had the temerity to buck the rules laid down by the state of Colorado. And the dad just went to the little girl and said, "Are you happy?" And she burst into tears, and she was like, "No, Daddy, I don't know why. I don't know how this happened. I'm not happy, and I don't want to be this anymore. But so many people are counting on me now because I've said that I'm a boy." And it's torture. And so after 9 months, they sort of fixed it. But I mean, there's a lot of damage there. There's 9 months of damage that needs to be somehow repaired. That's a lot of damage. And I'm just saying, maybe not send your child into that system.
I never thought about. I mean, I've thought about this topic quite a lot, which is why I reached out to you and invited you on. And I think that was a question that always kind of, okay, well, what about these doctors? What about these lawyers? And it comes back to, are we raising children based on strong moral foundational values and principles? And if you do that at home, if you prioritize that at the kitchen table, if you prioritize those conversations, you can still become a doctor, but you don't have to go that traditional route.
You can still serve people.
Yeah.
Now lawyers, maybe you need to go into the system to change it from within, but I still wouldn't say, like, if you I know, okay, youngest girl, I think she was the youngest woman in the state of California ever to attend law school, was homeschooled all the way through. She graduated high school and college simultaneously at like the age of 15, and then went to law school. Like, the problem, what we have to realize is when you're just going to be academics, okay? And by the way, this is why I left Duke, because it was all academics and I wanted everything else. And I couldn't have anything else if I stayed at Duke. So then I chose everything else instead of the academics. But when you make that choice, or when the child makes that choice, and she did, right? She was homeschooled, so she definitely had basically the gamut of choices in front of her. Um, then you're free to pursue it at whatever speed you want. And so she just went straight through and was done with high school and college at the same time. Like, that was right. That's incredible. You go, but she's just an anomaly. Not really. What happens is, when you go in school, you're on a conveyor belt. You may only go the speed of the class. They might put you ahead. You might be in the advanced class, but you're not going to do any better than that. And so that in itself is a limitation that clips your wings. If you've got a real knack for calculus, why not study calculus when you're 12? Well, because it's not offered for 12-year-olds, you know? And whereas if you're home, and the other thing, let's talk about this for just a minute. When you're doing home learning, or you're homeschooling, you're learning at home, you're at your own pace, but also what you learn is all the answers are in the book. So all you have to do is read the book, you'll learn it. It's that easy. You don't need a teacher. You don't need somebody at the blackboard lecturing to you so that you can, like, imbibe everything that they're saying and then regurgitate it later. That's not learning. That's memorization, right? So this is why I say it's not black and white. It's 3D Technicolor, full, H 4000 HK or whatever. It's the whole thing. And so it's just, my kids have so far surpassed anything that I could have thought up, that, that's why I'm such an advocate for this. Not only that, like, they're extraordinary individuals, but my relationship with them is something that I could never have predicted. It wasn't my goal. And I'll add one last thing because I like to tell people this because I think it's the most important thing that I did right. We read the Bible every morning. We read it for 15, 20 minutes. We just dove in and read a little bit and discussed it. And I would always like park on the words that we didn't understand. And I had an annotated Bible so we could like look them up really easily at the bottom of the page kind of thing. And that alone, I think, is what set my children on the path to truth and made them so staunch. They will debate you. They have no qualms. They have no insecurities about that because they know what they stand for. They know who they are. And and also they're willing to admit when they're wrong, although they seldom are, but when I'm around sometimes.
That's beautiful. What does a day of home learning look like, right? Because I think parents or people are going to hear this and like, this all sounds great, Sam, right? But we're both working, we're limited time. We don't have 8 hours to dedicate to our children's education, right? Once again, they're thinking in the system, right? So maybe we can kind of introduce them to these alternative methods, like time commitment. What's the structure of the day look like? I know it's all going to be individualized based upon ages, and then what your kind of the, I guess, rabbit holes you're going down with certain kids, right? Once you find their exceptionalness, boom, we're going to spend as long as you want on this thing. But if we could put it into kind of a framework.
They're going to spend, right? So let's put it into perspective. You asked what a day looks like. So for me, and I was highly academic with my kids, which I don't recommend, but when they were younger, we started our day at 9 o'clock at the kitchen counter. You will have eaten your breakfast because I don't want you getting up and going and getting more food or going back and forth. And so we started our day at 9 o'clock and we did Latin and we did Bible. And then we moved in. And so I had 3 kids and I would sit there and I would go over one lesson with one child, send them off to do the work. The other child would move in, I'd do the lesson with them, send them off to do the work. The third child, we'd do a little bit of something, send her off to do the work. The first child would come back, I did it. Okay, let's take a look at that. Good job. Now go do your math. So it was in and out and in and out. And I'm sitting there with my computer doing emails or prepping or whatever, whatever. And so for me, it was maybe with 3 kids, maybe it was 2 hours a day. But I also had free time. So I would take them to the museum or I'd take them to the park or I'd take them, somewhere. And then they could go off and explore. Maybe I would sit with my book or maybe I was, walking the museum with them and we were learning stuff at the museum. We'd go to the library. I'd sit with my book. They would go get their books. And so there's a freedom there that is not school. It's not locked in to any particular thing. They each had a list of to-dos, basically their homework and chores, and piano was on there also. They had to practice piano, so they had a checklist. So I had one child that would like scribble through everything as he did it. The other child put nice little neat check marks because there were boxes you could use, but and so I was like highly organized that way. And in fact, I think you might be able to find now a picture of my closet. My homeschool closet was like immaculate. It was fabulous. So I was highly organized that way, but I know parents who are much less organized. I know parents who are much more organized. And so you have your style. You are the curriculum. Your children will learn from you the best way to go about things. And there might be disagreement. Like my daughter's room was always a mess. And I finally figured out she really enjoyed the chaos. That was her style. And so even though, I would go in there every once in a while and I would encourage her, let's, clean this up. I finally just said, you know what, that's her style. And now today she's super neat. It was just that stage that she was working through. So there's a give and take with the rules and the parameters that you put on your kids. But I know single moms who have homeschooled 2 girls. She homeschooled 2 girls while working full time because homeschooling, you can homeschool from 6 to 8 every night. Okay. And young kids, certainly, but even the older kids, because as they grow, when they're 12, 13, 14, they start to take on autonomy and they start to do it themselves. And so all you're doing is sort of checking in with them and making sure that they read the book or having a discussion with them or reading their essay. So you can homeschool while you're working full time. And I know a few parents who did this, but this one mom in particular. And at one point, her girls were little, so she couldn't leave them alone. So she took like a loft apartment in the building where she worked. And she would go down and work in the store And then she'd go up on her breaks and just check in on her little girls. And so, like, there are different ways of getting it done. So people who say, oh, we both work. Well, guys, how important are your kids? I think they're more important than maybe your second car. Maybe that's a false, dichotomy, but I'm just saying, like you got to prioritize. This is something that we weren't taught to do in school. We were taught not to prioritize. We were taught to make pros and cons lists. That's just chaos. That just invites chaos, because now you have a list of, and you still don't know. What you need to do is make a priorities list. If you prioritize your children, everything else falls into place. And so, uh, if both of you are working, maybe one of you needs to sign up for the night shift. And that's a hardship. I get it. It's not good for a marriage necessarily, but it's doable. It's doable for a time certain. Nothing is forever. And so you make the sacrifice now for the end result. And your children should be, I think, the most important thing. Because when you're, 50 years from now and looking downhill, you want to have people around you.
Well, I'm not a parent, but I think you would, if you ask most parents, like, what's your goal with raising your children? It's to set them up to have a better life than you're having. And that's not going to be because you took them, because you lived in the bigger house or you had the second car. The vast majority of their better life is going to be dictated by who they become. Right. So it's like, if that's what you're saying is I'm trying to help my kids have a better life than I did, then your priority should be on the education and the development of the character, the values, the principles, and all these more important things that we're kind of speaking to.
Yeah, I'll put a caveat on that. I've had a pretty good life. I don't necessarily want my kids to have a better life. I want them to have a good life. And the good life for them will look different than what a good life for me looks like. But as long as I'm raising them to be good people, they will have a good life. Good people have good lives. They make good choices, they get good friends, they do good things, and they feel good. And so that's what I'll say.
Well, it's how you're perceiving better though too there, right? Better, maybe isn't about, you had a very successful modeling career, Hollywood actress, traveled the world, right? Like maybe not better in that context, but better in the fact that they don't have to find this, enemy in the world and go up against it and fight it. Maybe that's what they choose to do, right? Like I would say you probably have a lot of stress these days. You have a lot of attacks being thrown at you, online, maybe because some of the things that you and Kevin kind of talk about. I'm just, maybe projecting that onto you, but I don't know, right? So better is, contextualized, I think, depending on how you kind of look at it, right? But maybe with parents now that have kids, right? So they've done, they're through middle school, right? And they've gone the traditional route. The kids are going to be indoctrinated into a system as well, and even getting them home and bought into some of these changes. So how do you kind of facilitate that with a kid that is maybe pushing back against you of, I'm not going to do this?
Yeah. So there was a metric that was proposed. This is years ago, and it always stuck with me. If your child has been in school, they need at least a month per every year that they've been in school to not do school with you. And so you just have to. So what I do is, what I counsel parents is, when you take your child out of school, if they don't like school and they're coming out and they don't want a school, they don't want to homeschool, they don't want any of that, just give them the good books so that they can at least, and take them off the electronics, because that's just a distraction, and start from there and start to build. You need to build relationship, because you've lost trust. And so this is a reconciliation that has to take place, and you have to build the trust. And I really advocate for parents to be upfront with their kids. Look, I'm not perfect. I'm gonna give this my best shot. We need to be a partnership. I want to see what's best for you. I want you in 5 years to say this was the best thing that possibly could have happened. And so I need your help to make that happen, so that 5 years from now we're both looking back and saying, thank goodness we did that. And you have to convince them. You have to say, I've done a lot of research and I think this is the best choice. I've seen the videos of pretty young women who turn themselves into men because they buy into the transgender thing, and it's completely self-destructive. And so if you're facing that with your child, then you need to seriously, like, take some steps back from the school paradigm, which is really what did that to her. The school, the social media paradigm, all of those things sort of working in concert, the cultural paradigm. And so I mean, you need to, you really need to deal with that before you worry about academics, right? And maybe just some good books, because good books really, they take you out of yourself. They expose you to new ideas and new, just ways of dealing with the world, new ways of looking at the world, worldview. Make sure they're the good books. Nothing after printed or published after 1950, I would just say, just to make it easy on you, just don't, because you just don't know what's in. And the books today, some of them are just awful, and they're so highly recommended. I did a search on the internet, the top 20 best novels, and the one that comes out in Forbes, I think it was, and they had a photograph of somebody reading the book, was The Bluest Eye, which features sex scenes that are graphic and violent and homosexual and pedophilia, all in the book. Now, and I know the book, I know of it because it was in the schools in my school district, and we spoke about it at the school board. So I'm just saying, like, avoid that stuff, and feel free to reach out to me at samsorbo.com, because I answer questions like this all the time. And there is a way to redeem your relationship with your child. It's never really too late. Uh, and the sooner the better.
No, I appreciate that, Sam. And yeah, we'll have your links to the website and all the references on the books that we talked about here, some of the curricula or the different things that you mentioned. We have really good notes to. So guys, if you want more about this, we'll have all that link down there in the show notes. Sam, it's been a real pleasure and honor to have you on here today. As we wrap things up, we like to end every conversation here with the same and final question. So the title of our show is obviously called The Superhuman Life. I used to have this little kind of thing where I said, this is what it means to me, but I got away from doing that because I think I was kind of setting people up to answer this question the way that I wanted them to do. But as we end today's conversation, Sam, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Speak truth, speak it boldly.
I love it. I love it. Guys, make sure to follow Sam. Check out the work. Rebuild that relationship with your children. If this is something that you've been on the fence about, because we've addressed this here a couple times for you guys, now's the time to take the leap. 1 month of unschooling for every year that your kids were in school. I love that.
By the way, it's the restoration of the father in the household. That's what this is. It's restoration of the father in the household. And this is because they destroyed the family through schools. That was the destruction of the male. It's all cultural. So guys, get on it. You can make it happen.
I love it. Guys, connect with Sam. Rate, review, share this one as always. But for Sam, your host, Coach Frank here, we'll see you guys. We'll see you next week.